The gods had given them everything: beauty, power, and bloodline, but not the right to love each other. From the moment Jaime and Cersei were born, their fates were tangled like roots growing in the dark, fighting for space in the same cursed soil. They shared a womb, a bed, and eventually a secret that would break kingdoms. But what the world mistook for love, maybe it was something darker, something broken from the beginning. Jaime remembered the warmth of her fingers when they were still children in Casterly Rock, how they used to hold hands in the hallways, hiding from their strict scepters and guards. No one thought much of it back then. Twins are close after all. But Cersei always wanted more. Not more of him, more through him. He didn't realize it until much later, but she had never truly seen him. She had seen what he could be for her. A sword, a shield, a puppet in a golden suit of armor. Even as kids, Cersei was the one with the venom in her smile. She was always watching, calculating, setting traps in her own home. She would lie to her father about things Jaime had done, just to see if Tywin would punish him. When Jaime finally asked her why, she just laughed and said, "If you can't survive me, how will you survive the world?" At first, Jaime thought it was a game. That was the dangerous thing about loving Cersei. She made cruelty feel like affection. She knew how to confuse loyalty with romance. She would kiss him in secret, tell him he was her only, whisper that the rest of the world didn't matter. But then she'd vanish for days, reappear with that look in her eyes, as if she'd been testing him from afar. When Robert Baratheon married her, Jaime watched her walk down the aisle in a dress too perfect to belong to anyone but her. She looked beautiful that day, but cold, like a statue carved from marble and pride. She didn't cry. She didn't look back. And when she returned to him later that night, she didn't cry then either. She just whispered, "It's done, but you're still mine."
The air in King's Landing had changed. Jaime noticed it the day he returned from River Run. The city used to smell of smoke and sweat and the sea, but now it reeked of fear. The common folk no longer whispered their prayers aloud. The guards didn't speak unless ordered. Even the gold cloaks, once drunk with power, walked the halls like men already sentenced. And at the center of it all stood Cersei, crowned queen, dressed in black, eyes colder than the iron throne she sat on. Jaime had missed the trial, missed the explosion, missed the screams. By the time he rode through the gates, the Sept of Baelor was ash, and hundreds were dead, including Marjorie Tyrell, the High Sparrow, and every man of the faith who dared oppose her. Tommen, their last living child, had thrown himself from a window not long after. No note, no goodbye, just a quiet fall and a crown with no heir left to wear it. Jaime stood beside his sister as she was crowned, his golden hand clenched tightly at his side. He looked at her as the crowd cheered, and for the first time he felt nothing. No pride, no warmth, just a bitter silence growing inside his chest. He wanted to ask her, was it worth it? But he already knew the answer. Cersei had always believed in power. Love to her was useful only when it kept someone loyal. But even love from her own children wasn't sacred. She called Tommen weak, said he should have been stronger, that he failed her. Not that she failed him. Not once did she weep, not for the boy, not for the hundreds who died in the wildfire. She only hardened, like stone under fire, unbreakable and cold. That night, Jaime sat alone in the old Tower of the Hand. He drank quietly, not to forget, but to remember. He thought of the first time he held Tommen. The boy had been soft, gentle, nothing like Joffrey. He was kind even as a child. He didn't crave power. And now he was gone, another victim of the same hunger that had swallowed them all. He stared at his reflection in a cracked goblet and whispered, "I killed a king to stop wildfire, and now I love the woman who used it to burn hundreds." The irony tasted worse than the wine. He had once thrown away his honor for Cersei, lied, killed, betrayed. He had become Kingslayer, a name spat like venom across Westeros. And still he stayed loyal. Still he fought her battles. Still he convinced himself that behind her cruelty was a woman who loved him. But now he couldn't lie anymore. Love isn't selfish. Love doesn't burn cities or turn children into ashes. What Jaime felt wasn't love. It was obsession. Devotion twisted by years of secrecy and shame. He had built a prison with her and called it passion. But it wasn't. It never was. In the days that followed, he tried to reach her. Not physically. She was always in her chamber, flanked by silence and shadows. No, he tried to reach whatever part of her soul still remembered who they once were. He spoke carefully, asked questions, suggested mercy. But Cersei didn't want mercy. She wanted revenge. She spoke of Tyrion like a plague, promised to kill Daenerys, laughed at Jon Snow's letters. She had grown into something monstrous, and she didn't even see it. Or worse, she did see it and wore it like a crown. One morning, as they stood on the battlements overlooking the charred remains of the Sept, Jaime finally broke the silence. "You're not the woman I loved." Cersei didn't flinch. "Then perhaps you never did." He looked at her and felt something strange, pity. For years he believed they were cursed by birth, destined to love in secret, punished for it. But maybe they weren't cursed lovers at all. Maybe they were just two damaged people who mistook their scars for soulmates. That night he walked past the throne room and didn't stop to speak to her. He wandered the city streets instead, in plain clothes, unarmed, just watching. He saw starving children, burned homes, dead eyes. He saw a kingdom dying quietly under the weight of a queen's ambition. And for the first time in his life, Jaime Lannister asked himself, what if walking away from her was the only honorable thing I could do? But even that question wasn't easy, because love, even when false, doesn't let go without a fight. The first time Jaime had truly believed in redemption, it wasn't because of Cersei. It was because of Brienne. She had been everything Cersei was not: honest, brave, stubborn to a fault, but without cruelty. Cersei didn't need to manipulate anyone to earn their loyalty. She just lived her truth. And that truth challenged Jaime in ways Cersei never had. He remembered the baths at Harrenhal, the way his voice cracked when he finally told the story, how he'd killed the Mad King to save 500,000 lives. It was the first time he had spoken the truth in years, and Brienne hadn't judged him. She had looked at him like he wasn't a monster, not a Kingslayer, just a man torn in half, trying to hold himself together with shame and sarcasm. Cersei would never have looked at him like that. But even after all that, Jaime had returned to Cersei. He always did, not because he believed in her, but because he didn't believe in himself. The truth was ugly. Jaime had been afraid that without her he was nothing, that if he gave up the only person who ever wanted him, twisted as it was, he'd be alone, forgotten, a broken knight with no place in any story. And Cersei knew it. She used that fear like a blade. But fear was slowly giving way to clarity. The day Daenerys arrived at the gates of King's Landing with her dragons and her army, Jaime felt something shift in his bones. It wasn't loyalty to her cause. He didn't even trust her fully. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. If Cersei didn't surrender, thousands would die. And she didn't care. "She'll burn the city before she kneels," Jaime had told Qyburn. "Then let it burn," Qyburn replied, like it was strategy, not madness. He went to her chamber one last time. The door was open, but the atmosphere was like ice. She sat alone, crown tilted slightly, wine in hand, looking over the city as if it were already hers to bury. "You can still stop this," Jaime said quietly. Cersei didn't even look at him. "Would you stop a storm by whispering to the clouds?" "This isn't a storm. It's wildfire, and you're holding the torch." Finally she turned, and for the first time in a long while, she looked tired. Not defeated, not weak, just exhausted. As if the weight of her own hate had worn her down to the bone. "I gave up everything for this throne, Jaime. Everything, including you." That cut deeper than he expected. "You never had me, Cersei. You only had my loyalty." "Same thing," she said coldly. He stepped closer, and for a moment he almost reached for her. Habit, maybe, or something deeper, that part of his heart that still remembered her laugh before it turned into a weapon. But he stopped himself. "I'm leaving," he said. Her eyes narrowed, not with sadness, but with offense. "To her?" she asked, meaning Brienne. "No," he said, "to myself." That made her laugh, a cool, dry sound. "You'll be back. You always come back." But this time, something in him whispered otherwise. Jaime left King's Landing in the dead of night, not as a knight, not as a brother or lover, just a man with too many regrets and not enough time to fix them all. He didn't have a plan. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew what he was leaving behind. He passed familiar places, markets where they once snuck through as children, towers they used to race to the top of. Every corner of the city felt haunted by their memories, but none of them brought peace. Only reminders of how long he had been trapped in someone else's dream. For the first time, the wind was colder in the north than Jaime remembered. It bit through his cloak, stung his skin, and left his bones aching in a way that had nothing to do with the journey. Maybe it wasn't the wind at all. Maybe it was the shame. When he arrived at Winterfell, no one welcomed him. He didn't expect them to. Not after what he had done. Not after what he still represented. The Kingslayer. The man who shoved a child from a tower to protect a lie. The man who stood beside the queen who burned a sept full of innocence. His crimes followed him like shadows. The first face he saw in the courtyard was Bran Stark. Older now. Colder, too. Like the gods had carved the boy into stone and left only a trace of humanity behind. Bran didn't speak much, but his eyes saw straight through Jaime. "You came all this way," Bran said calmly, "to help fight a war, or to die in one." Jaime hesitated.
Maybe both. Bran didn't blink. You still think you're in control of that choice. It wasn't a threat, just a truth Jaime wasn't ready to face. He'd spent years running from accountability, burying guilt beneath duty, loyalty, love. But Winterfell was different. There was no politics here, no thrones to chase, just survival. And for the first time in a long while, Jaime felt like a man stripped bare. No armor, no lies, no Cersei. Brienne was here too. He hadn't known that for certain until he saw her, sword in hand, instructing soldiers in the courtyard. She looked stronger than he remembered, not in size, but in presence. There was something solid about her, something unshakable. Like the world could collapse and she'd still be standing, blade drawn, ready to fight. She saw him eventually. Their eyes met across the yard, and in that moment, all his words fled. He'd imagined this meeting so many times, how he'd apologize, how he'd explain. But now that she was in front of him, he realized he didn't deserve to speak first. "You came all this way," she said. He nodded. "I wasn't sure either." She looked at him for a long time. Then finally she said, "You left her." It wasn't a question. It wasn't judgment either. Just quiet observation. "I had to," Jaime replied. "I stayed for too long already." Brienne didn't soften. She didn't rush to forgive him. But she stepped closer, and in that one gesture, Jaime felt more grace than Cersei had shown him in years. "You can fight beside us," she said. "But if you're here to atone, you'd better start by surviving." That night, as he stood along the battlements, watching the horizon for signs of the dead, Jaime thought about what love should have been. Not a trap, not a secret war, but this. Two people, standing shoulder to shoulder, not because of blood or obligation, but choice. He remembered something Tyrion had once told him, half drunk in a brothel. "You love her because you were born with her. That's not love, Jaime. That's gravity." And it had taken him this long to see it. Cersei wasn't his soulmate. She was a tether. She kept him chained to a past he was too afraid to let go of. But now, far from her reach, Jaime felt something strange blooming inside his chest. Not joy, not even hope. Relief. The next morning brought war. The army of the dead crashed into Winterfell like a storm of teeth and frost. Jaime fought with everything he had. His golden hand was useless in battle, but his instincts, his will, that was still sharp. He fought beside Brienne, back to back, their blades dancing through the chaos. There were no titles in that fight, no houses, no names, just breath and blood. He thought of Cersei then, how she refused to send her armies, how she had chosen the throne over the realm. And he realized that was always her way, to hold power even if the world burned around her. And he had loved her for it. No, not loved. He had worshipped her. The battle ended in ash and silence. Jaime lived. So did Brienne. But something in him had changed, something permanent. As he stared at the pyres, the bodies lined for burning, he whispered a truth he never could have said before. "She never loved me." Not really. Brienne didn't answer. She just stood beside him, quiet, her presence steady and solid like a vow kept. And for the first time, Jaime Lannister didn't feel like a kingslayer. He felt like a man who could finally become something else. After the dead were burned and the smoke lifted from Winterfell's ruined fields, Jaime Lannister felt something strange in his chest. It wasn't joy, not even relief. It was weight, heavy but clean, like armor made of truth, not lies. He had survived. That, in itself, felt wrong. The battle against the dead should have been his end. He'd even welcomed it in the darkest corner of his mind. A poetic finish to a broken life, die with a sword in hand, next to Brienne, fighting for something that finally mattered. But the gods weren't feeling poetic. So he lived. And now he had to face the harder question. What now? In the quiet days after the war, Jaime helped rebuild the walls, not because someone asked him to, but because it felt honest. There was no gold in it, no glory, just stone, sweat, and silence. And in that silence, he began to see himself, not as a Lannister, not as Cersei's shadow, but as a man trying to make peace with the blood on his hands. He spent more time with Brienne, though he never asked for more than her company. There was no need for grand confessions. Their connection wasn't loud. It was something else, earned, scarred, and quietly sacred. They spoke often, but never about Cersei. Brienne didn't pry, and Jaime didn't offer. Not yet. One evening they sat near a fire, watching the snow fall in lazy flakes. "You've changed," she said simply. Jaime turned to her, his golden hand resting on his knee. "Or maybe I just stopped pretending." She didn't smile, but there was warmth in her eyes, a kind of acceptance Cersei never offered him. With Cersei, love had always been a performance. You were either useful or you were discarded. Brienne didn't need him to be anything but who he was, and that scared him more than he liked to admit. Because now, with the war behind us, with Cersei hundreds of miles away, Jaime began to see the truth he had never wanted to face. He didn't love Cersei anymore. He missed her, yes. He missed the childhood laughter, the moments of reckless freedom they once shared. He missed who he thought she was. But love, real love, that had died the day she chose the throne over her own children. The day she looked at Tommen's body and felt only insult, not grief. But even now, with all his growth, a part of Jaime still felt bound, like an invisible thread pulled him south, not because of desire, but guilt, the kind that doesn't fade even with truth. "I keep thinking about going back," he confessed one night. Brienne looked at him, still and calm. To her? To end it? To see it through? I don't know. Maybe it's cowardice, or maybe I think I owe it to her, to face her. Or maybe you owe it to yourself to finally let her go, she said quietly. That silence afterwards said more than any argument. He didn't sleep that night. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, the fire flickering shadows on the stone walls. Cersei's voice still lived in his head, sharp, commanding, intimate. She had controlled him so long, even in absence she ruled parts of him. And that was the hardest thing. Jaime had spent years trying to be her sword, her secret, her safety net. But now that he had cut the rope, he didn't know who he was anymore. A knight? A man trying to atone? Or just a ghost of who he might have been had he walked?
The road back to King's Landing felt longer than it ever had before. Not in distance, but in weight. Every turn of the path carried memories, ghosts, and doubts. Jaime rode alone, passing through quiet villages where the war had left its mark. Burned homes, broken fields, hungry children too tired to cry. The scars of a kingdom ruled by fear and fire. And at the heart of it all was her, Cersei. Jaime had imagined this return 100 different ways. Sometimes in dreams she greeted him with open arms, full of regret and softness that had never truly existed. Other times she stood cold and cruel, mocking him for ever leaving. But in truth, he didn't know what version of her he would find, or if the woman he once loved even existed anymore. When he reached the outskirts of the city, he saw what war had done. The gates were shut tight. The walls were reinforced. The people inside were prisoners of a queen who feared everyone, even her own reflection. Jaime had to sneak through a hidden path, one he'd used long ago during his youthful escapades. It felt strange now, crawling through shadows like a thief in a city he once helped protect. King's Landing was dying from the inside out. Streets were quieter, faces were pale and hollow, laughter no longer echoed through the markets. Soldiers patrolled like predators, not protectors. And still, banners bearing the Lion of House Lannister flapped in the wind, as if pretending everything was still golden. He reached the Red Keep at nightfall, cloaked in gray, hood over his face. He walked its halls like a ghost, unnoticed by most, except Qyburn. The twisted old maester spotted him near the Queen's Tower and stopped him with a thin smile. "You returned," Qyburn said, as if commenting on the weather. "I need to see her," Jaime replied. Qyburn tilted his head, studying him like a specimen. "She's changed, as have you. Be careful what you hope to find." Jaime didn't answer. He just walked past, climbing the familiar stairs with a strange calm in his chest. His heart didn't race. His hands didn't shake. It wasn't love anymore that pushed him upward. It was truth. He found her standing alone by the window of her chamber, dressed in black, the crown heavy on her head. Her back was to him, but she spoke without turning. "I knew you'd come back." Her voice hadn't changed, still sharp, still filled with a confidence she wore like armor, but there was a crack underneath it, one only Jaime could hear. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "I didn't come for you," he said. She turned then, slowly. Her eyes flicked over him, older now, dirtier, tired. Her mouth curled into something between a smirk and a grimace. "You came to judge me." "No," Jaime said. "I came to say goodbye." That made her laugh. "You think you get to choose when this ends. I already chose, when I left." Cersei moved closer, but not too close. "You think Brienne made you a better man? You think fighting the dead washes the blood off your hands?" "I don't want to be better than you, Cersei. I just don't want to be you." Her eyes flared, and for a second, Jaime saw the storm behind him, the fury, the fear, the desperation. "You left me when I needed you most," she whispered. "No," he said softly. "I left when I finally saw you for what you are." She slapped him. Hard. It didn't surprise him. It didn't even hurt. He just looked at her, her hand trembling slightly as it dropped back to her side. "You still love me. You always will." Jaime looked at her then, really looked. The woman who once held his heart in her hand now seemed small, not weak, but hollow. The power she had clung to so tightly had eaten away everything human in her. What was left was a throne made of fear, and a woman too proud to admit she'd lost. "I thought we were meant to die together," she whispered, voice cracking. Maybe we are, Jaime said quietly. But that doesn't make it love. That makes it a tragedy. They stood there, two shadows of the same past, the silence between them filled with every wrong choice, every broken promise. He turned to leave. Where will you go? Anywhere that's not here. And as he stepped into the corridor, he didn't look back. He didn't need to. The door had finally closed. The sea air smelled cleaner than Jaime remembered. As he stood on the deck of the small ship bound north, the wind pulled at his cloak and tangled his hair. Somewhere behind him, the city burned. Not with fire, not yet, but with the slow rot of a rule built on fear and desperation. King's Landing wasn't a home. It never had been. Just a cage, gilded in gold and soaked in blood. He hadn't said a word to anyone as he left the Red Keep. No declarations, no last vows. He didn't need to. Cersei had watched him go, and for the first time in their lives, she didn't try to stop him. Maybe she knew it was over. Maybe she just didn't have the strength anymore. He leaned on the railing, staring out at the horizon. The world looked wide again. That used to scare me, being untethered, uncertain. But now it felt like freedom. The truth was, Jaime Lannister never had been free. Not truly. Not as a boy molded by Tywin, not as a knight chained to honor, and certainly not as Cersei's other half, always orbiting around her fury, her ambition, her needs. That was the great lie they told themselves, that their love was fate, that being twins made them one. But it hadn't been love. It was dependency, a lifelong entanglement rooted in shared trauma and twisted loyalty. And when one of them tried to change, to grow, the other pulled them back into the fire. Cersei didn't want a partner. She wanted possession. And Jaime, he let himself be owned. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. For once, the silence inside him didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like peace. By the time he reached the Riverlands, news of King's Landing's fall was already spreading. Daenerys had arrived. The battle had begun. Fire was raining from the sky, and the Red Keep was crumbling under the weight of years of sins. The city was becoming ash, just like the Mad King it once threatened. History has a strange way of repeating itself. Jaime paused in a small inn, listening to frightened travelers speak in hushed voices. They say she burned the whole city, someone whispered. The queen's dead, someone else said. Cersei, buried under her own throne. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just walked outside, sat beneath a tree, and let the silence wash over him. She was gone. After everything, after all the blood spilled, the lives destroyed, the kingdom fractured, Cersei died beneath the thing she loved most, power. No justice, no grand finale, just stone and dust and silence. Jaime stared at the sky. He didn't feel triumph, or rage, or even relief. Just a strange emptiness that felt almost deserved. Like something inside him had finally been severed, quietly, without ceremony. She had once told him they'd leave the world together, like they'd entered it, side by side. But that was her fantasy, not his. Jaime no longer believed in destiny. He believed in choice. And in the end, she had made hers, and he had made his. He traveled north again, this time not to fight, not to flee, but to begin. When he arrived at Winterfell, the cold welcomed him like an old friend. Brienne was there, waiting. She didn't rush into her arms or weep with joy. She simply looked at him, saw him, and nodded, like she had always known he would return. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she asked. I paused. "No," I said. "But I found what I needed." She didn't ask what that meant. She just walked beside him, as if